My name is Charlotte Reed, and I was 18 when my mother turned my graduation into a public ranking of her daughters. She took the microphone inside our family's furniture showroom, raised her glass, and announced, "At least she's smart. Beauty skipped her, but maybe intelligence will pay the bills." The room erupted. Not everyone laughed, but enough people did. Then she pulled my younger sister beside her, adjusted the flower on her dress, and added, "This one got the looks. God knows how to balance a family." My father stared at the floor. Several relatives lifted their phones. Someone recorded everything. I stood beneath a banner bearing my name while my own family treated me like the joke printed below it. Have you ever been made to feel like the spare child on the one day that was supposed to belong to you? I walked into the office, opened the envelope containing my savings from weekend shifts, and counted $355. Then I removed my house key and placed it beside the graduation card my mother had signed without writing a message. I left before the cake was cut. They told everyone I was dramatic. Within weeks, they stopped mentioning me. 12 years later, I walked into my sister's wedding carrying proof that my family had never truly released me. Minutes before the ceremony, her groom examined one page, looked at his bride, and asked a question that destroyed everything she had built in front of 200 guests. Before I tell you what he asked, and what happened after the wedding stopped, tell me what time it is where you are, and where you're watching from. I want to know how far Charlotte's story has traveled. The bus ticket from Columbus to Pittsburgh cost $43, leaving me with 312 and no plan beyond getting far enough away that my mother could not follow before midnight. I chose Pittsburgh because a former classmate had mentioned an affordable technical college there, but when I arrived, the admissions office was closed, and every motel near the station cost more than I could spare. I spent my first night beneath the fluorescent lights of a 24-hour laundromat, pretending to wait for clothes that were not mine. The next morning, I found a handwritten hiring notice at a commercial printing company. The job involved feeding paper into industrial machines, preparing shipping labels, and moving boxes into a records warehouse. I told the supervisor I had experience, although my only qualification was desperation. He hired me for the overnight shift because nobody else wanted it. That warehouse became my refuge. It smelled of cardboard, toner, and dust, but no one cared how I looked. They cared whether I arrived on time, read work orders correctly, and placed confidential files in the right sequence. I rented a room from Naomi Brooks, a 24-year-old nursing student whose previous roommate had disappeared without paying rent. Naomi did not rescue me or offer perfect speeches. She gave me 7 days to produce my share of the deposit and warned me not to touch the yogurt marked with blue tape. Her honesty made me trust her. On my 6th night in the apartment, my mother called from an unfamiliar number. Naomi answered because I was showering. I entered the kitchen just as she heard my mother say, "Tell Charlotte that running away won't make her face easier to look at." Naomi placed the phone on speaker and asked, "Are you always this cruel? Or is tonight special?" My mother ended the call after warning her that I was unstable, ungrateful, and known for stealing. I stood there shaking, not because I believed her, but because I finally heard how easily she rewrote me for strangers. Naomi opened a notebook and told me to record the date, number, and exact words. "People who lie this confidently depend on everyone else for getting details," she said. That sentence changed my life. I began saving every voicemail, letter, and message. During the day, I studied records administration and business systems. At night, I worked among archived contracts, invoices, signatures, and shipping manifests. I learned that documents carried personalities. Some people pressed hard when signing. Others changed the angle of their handwriting when nervous. Altered dates left shadows beneath copier ink. Reprinted pages showed different patterns. A lie on paper was quieter than a lie spoken into a microphone, but it could be measured. My family mailed 3 letters during my first year. The first demanded an apology. The second claimed my father was seriously ill, which I later learned was false. The third said my sister had entered a private academy and that a loving daughter would contribute. I did not answer. Freedom, however, did not erase the injury. Whenever someone photographed me, I heard laughter from the showroom. Compliments felt like traps. I avoided mirrors and bought clothes from clearance racks without trying them on. Escaping had freed my body, but my mother's voice had crossed state lines inside my head. Isn't that the loneliest part of leaving? Discovering that the door can close behind you while the damage keeps walking beside you? Naomi pushed me to apply for a certification course in document examination after an instructor noticed how quickly I detected discrepancies in contracts. I almost refused because the deposit exceeded the money I had carried out of Ohio. Naomi reminded me that I had earned every dollar since then without asking my family's permission. I applied, received partial funding, and spent the next 3 years working nights while studying financial records, identity fraud, signature comparison, digital alteration, and evidence procedures. My mother taught me that appearances determined value. The warehouse taught me the opposite. A polished document could be fraudulent, while a stained page could contain the truth. By 22, I no longer wanted to be called beautiful. I wanted to become impossible to deceive. After earning my certification, I joined an insurance investigation firm in Baltimore that specialized in forged claims, altered contracts, employee theft, and identity misuse. My work was not glamorous. I spent long days comparing signatures, examining transaction histories, reconstructing approval chains, and interviewing people who believed confidence could replace evidence. I loved it. Every case gave me what childhood never had: facts that could not be overruled by the loudest person in the room. Naomi moved to Maryland after nursing school, and we remained roommates until she married and moved across town. She was still the first person I called when a case unsettled me or a letter arrived from Ohio. My father sent birthday cards without a return address. My sister occasionally sent social media requests, then withdrew them before I could respond. My mother stayed publicly silent, but relatives told me she had transformed my departure into a tragedy in which she was the abandoned parent. According to her story, I left because I was jealous of my sister, ashamed of the family business, and too arrogant to accept guidance. She even claimed the graduation video had been misunderstood. I considered posting it, but revenge built on humiliation would have made me too much like her. Instead, I built a life she could not narrate. Before turning 27, I became a senior investigator, lectured at compliance workshops, recovered money for elderly fraud victims, and assisted federal examiners on multi-state cases. I also met Marcus Hale, a patient architect who never rushed to fill silence. He did not call me beautiful on our first date. He called me formidable after I corrected a restaurant manager who tried to charge an elderly couple twice. Somehow, that meant more. I told him about my family slowly, offering pieces instead of the whole wound. He never pressured me to reconcile. He only asked whether my distance gave me peace or postponed another decision. The answer changed depending on the day. Then, 8 years after I left, a routine commercial fraud case placed my mother's handwriting on my desk. Our firm had been hired to examine documents connected to a failing home furnishings company in Ohio. The company had received emergency credit after claiming losses from a warehouse flood, but several authorization forms appeared suspicious. At first, the company name meant nothing because my parents had renamed the showroom through a holding company. Then I recognized the address. It was where my graduation party had taken place. I disclosed the conflict and requested removal from the case, but before transferring the file, I saw a borrower authorization bearing my full legal name, Charlotte Elise Reed. The signature had been designed to resemble mine. It was imperfect, but it included details only someone with my childhood records would know. The application listed me as a minority co-owner who had approved using company assets as collateral. I had never owned a share of the business or signed a loan. The forms were dated 2 years after I left. My social security number, former address, and school records were attached. I felt 18 again, standing beneath that banner while people laughed. My mother had publicly erased me, then privately used my identity when it became valuable. Because of the conflict, I could not investigate professionally, but I could request my credit history and report identity theft. What I discovered was larger than one signature. Months after I left, my mother had opened a retail account in my name. She paid it carefully enough to avoid detection, then used the established credit history to support business borrowing. Over the years, my name appeared on equipment leases, supplier guarantees, and refinancing documents. Most accounts were closed, but one remained active. It secured a credit line recently increased by $380,000. Marcus sat beside me as I spread the records across our dining table. "Are you going to confront them?" he asked. I said no, not yet. Confrontation would give my mother time to destroy records and prepare another story. I filed reports, froze my credit, hired an Ohio attorney, and authorized the lender's fraud department to investigate. For the first time, I did not respond as the difficult daughter. I responded as an examiner preserving evidence. A month later, my sister called. I had not heard her voice in 8 years. She cried, said our mother was under terrible stress, and asked me to sign a statement confirming that I had verbally approved the old arrangements. She called it harmless paperwork. When I refused, her voice hardened. "You already left us once. Are you really going to destroy Mom over a signature?" I asked whose idea it had been to use my name. She remained silent for 4 seconds before saying, "You weren't using it for anything." That answer ended whatever nostalgia I had preserved. My family had not forgotten me. They had treated my identity like an empty room they were entitled to occupy. Before hanging up, she mentioned that she was engaged to Ethan Cole, a commercial lending manager from Cincinnati. The wedding would take place the following spring at a restored courthouse hotel, and our mother was supposedly paying for everything. When I reviewed the active credit line again, I noticed several large transfers to an event company connected to the hotel. The wedding was not funded by my mother. It was financed through debt obtained with my stolen identity. I sent the evidence to my attorney and said nothing publicly. Revenge would not require me to invent a punishment. I only had to stop protecting them from the consequences they had created. 3 months before the wedding, a cream invitation arrived at my office. My name was handwritten, but there was no personal note. It described the ceremony as a celebration of loyalty, family, and new beginnings. Naomi believed they wanted me there so they could display a repaired family image before the investigation became public. Marcus suspected something more practical. If I attended without objecting, my mother might later claim my presence proved I had accepted the financial arrangements. My attorney agreed that attending could be useful, provided I made no statements about the investigation and carried copies of my identity theft report. I replied that I would come alone. Marcus wanted to accompany me, but I needed to enter that building without hiding behind another person. I was not returning to prove that a successful man loved me. I was returning as the owner of my own name, On the wedding morning, I wore a dark green dress and the silver watch Naomi had given me when I passed my final certification exam. The courthouse hotel stood less than 10 miles from my childhood home, but it felt like another world. Marble floors, tall windows, white flowers, musicians, and staff carrying trays beneath gold-painted ceilings. My mother saw me near the registration table and froze before producing her polished client smile. "Charlotte," she said loudly, "you actually came." Then she turned to several relatives and added, "Our runaway finally remembered she has a family." A few people laughed uncertainly. 12 years earlier, that sound would have sent me toward the nearest exit. This time, I held her gaze and replied, "I remember exactly what kind of family I have." My father appeared behind her, older and thinner than I remembered. He hugged me without asking and whispered that he was sorry. I stepped back. "Sorry for what?" He glanced toward my mother and said, "For how everything happened." That answer showed he still could not name what he had allowed. My sister arrived in a silk robe, surrounded by bridesmaids and a photographer. She looked startled, then pulled me into a stiff embrace for the camera. "Let's not make today about old drama," she whispered. "Then don't use my name to pay for it," I answered. Her hand tightened around my arm. For one instant, the cheerful bride vanished, revealing the woman who had said I was not using my identity for anything. She released me before the photographer noticed. My mother introduced me to guests as our brilliant but complicated daughter. She told one couple that I had vanished after graduation because I could not tolerate discipline. She showed another guest an old yearbook photograph in which I wore braces and had been caught mid-blink. "She hated cameras back then," my mother said. "You can see why. If the woman who taught you to despise yourself stood before you 12 years later wearing the same smile, would you stay silent to protect the event or remove the mask?" I did neither. I asked, "Have you shown them the loan documents too?" Her face lost color. She guided me into an empty conference room and closed the door. My father followed while my sister remained outside pretending not to watch. My mother accused me of timing the investigation to sabotage the wedding. She claimed the signatures were administrative shortcuts, not fraud, because parents often handled paperwork for their children. I reminded her that I had been a legal adult living in another state and had never authorized any account. My father explained that the business had been close to failure and dozens of employees depended on them. "So you volunteered my identity," I said. He admitted my mother first used my information because my credit file was clean. He objected but later signed corporate resolutions supporting the loans. His confession sounded embarrassed, as though embarrassment were the real injury. My mother removed a prepared statement from her purse. It claimed I had verbally approved all accounts and had recently misunderstood the arrangements because of emotional distress. She offered to pay me $50,000 after refinancing if I signed it that morning. I recognized the formatting from the lender's file. She had planned everything. The invitation was bait. "You invited me to turn fraud into consent," I said. She told me not to use dramatic legal words. Then she grabbed my document case and tried to remove the folder containing my reports. I caught it before she could pull it away. My sister entered and locked the door. "Just sign," she said. "Mom already paid deposits that can't be refunded." I asked whether Ethan knew where the wedding money came from. She looked at the floor. That was my answer. I returned the statement to my mother and said every attempt to pressure me would be documented. When I opened the door, Ethan stood in the hallway. He had heard only the final sentence, but his expression had changed. He asked whether a financial problem affected the wedding. My sister quickly called it a private misunderstanding about the company. I said nothing because my attorney had warned me not to interfere with the lender's process. Ethan looked at my folder and the affidavit on the table. As a lending professional, he recognized what he was seeing. My mother guided him away while laughing about wedding nerves, but suspicion had entered the room. The ceremony was 40 minutes away. For the first time, my mother was not afraid of losing me. She was afraid someone might finally believe me. I sat near the back of the ballroom while guests gathered beneath an arch of white roses. My relatives watched me with the fascination reserved for someone they had already discussed. An aunt leaned over and said my mother had forgiven me years ago. I asked what she had forgiven, and the aunt suddenly became interested in the program. Another relative told me my parents had suffered terribly after I disappeared. No one asked what could make an 18-year-old choose a laundromat over returning home. That was the structure of my family. My mother supplied the story, my father supported it through silence, and everyone else accepted it because questioning her would make dinner uncomfortable. 10 minutes before the processional, Ethan approached me with his phone. He asked to speak privately. His voice remained controlled, but I recognized the expression of someone whose professional instincts had found a pattern his emotions wanted to reject. We entered a library beside the ballroom. Ethan explained that the hotel's event manager had informed him of a problem with the final payment. The account used for the wedding had been flagged, freezing the remaining transfer. My sister had always claimed the money came from family business reserves, but the transaction notice displayed the obligated guarantor's name, Charlotte E. Reed. "Is that you?" he asked. I said yes. "Did you authorize the loan?" I said no. He stared at the screen and asked how long I had known. I explained that I had reported the identity theft months before receiving the invitation and that the lender controlled the timing. I showed him my report number, a copy of the disputed signature, and the statement my mother had just tried to make me sign. I revealed no confidential investigative material and exaggerated nothing. The truth was enough. Ethan read the affidavit twice. "Does Samantha know?" he asked. I told him to ask her. My mother entered before he could respond. She accused me of cornering the groom and trying to destroy my sister's happiness out of jealousy. Ethan held up the affidavit and asked why it had been prepared before I arrived. My mother said lawyers had created it to settle a misunderstanding. He asked why his fiancée had told him the wedding was paid with business profits when the funds came from a line of credit guaranteed in my name. My sister entered in her gown, followed by my father. Her first question was not whether I had been harmed. She asked whether the ceremony could proceed if they replaced the payment by Monday. Ethan looked at her as though she had spoken a foreign language. "You knew?" She said she knew our mother had borrowed money, but not that the paperwork was illegal. I reminded her of our recorded call. My mother shouted that recording family was a betrayal. "Using my social security number was the betrayal," I replied. My father shut the library doors, but several members of the wedding party had gathered outside. My sister began crying and insisted she deserved one day untouched by my resentment. She described what she had endured after I left. Our mother's pressure, our father's withdrawal, the failing business, and the expectation that she become the perfect daughter. For the first time, I saw that she had been shaped by the same system, though rewarded differently. But being harmed did not erase the harm, she continued. "You could have told him," I said. "You could have told me. Instead, you let them finance your perfect day with the identity of the sister you claimed abandoned you." My mother stepped between us and declared that family assets belong to the family. Because she had raised and fed me, she believed using my credit was repayment. Ethan asked whether she had used my sister's identity as well. No one answered. He turned to my father, who admitted that one equipment lease had been placed under my sister's name, supposedly with permission. My sister immediately denied consenting. That contradiction widened the collapse. My mother had normalized forgery so completely that even her favored daughter could not tell where consent ended and manipulation began. The coordinator knocked and announced that guests were seated. My mother ordered everyone back into position. Ethan said he needed time. She warned that postponement would humiliate the family and damage relationships with clients attending the ceremony. Her concern was not the crime, deception, or people she had used. It was the audience. That was when I understood why she humiliated me publicly at graduation. Private cruelty controlled one person. Public humiliation controlled everyone watching. She had spent years turning rooms full of people into weapons. Now that same room was becoming evidence. Ethan asked my sister one final time whether she knew my name appeared on the wedding financing. She admitted seeing it 3 months earlier. She said our mother assured her I would eventually sign a release. "So, you planned to marry me before telling me your sister was disputing the money paying for our wedding?" he asked. My sister reached toward him, but he stepped back. The musicians began playing in the ballroom, unaware that the bridal party had stopped moving. My mother seized my wrist and hissed that none of this would have happened if I had stayed away. I removed her hand. "No. It happened because you believed I would always stay silent." Ethan opened the library doors. The coordinator asked whether the ceremony should begin. He looked toward the ballroom and then at my sister. "Yes," he said, "but not the ceremony she planned." Ethan entered the ballroom alone and asked the musicians to stop. Conversations faded as guests turned toward him. My sister followed several steps behind, still holding her bouquet, while my mother whispered instructions that no one obeyed. I remained near the library doors with my father. Part of me wanted to leave. I had not come to watch my sister collapse publicly, and I did not want to become another person who used humiliation as power. But leaving would allow my mother to create a new version before guests reached the parking lot. Ethan took the microphone and apologized for the delay. He said information had emerged about the financing of the event and statements made to him throughout the engagement. My mother rushed forward, calling it a private family disagreement. Ethan told her it became his concern when his name was added to vendor contracts supported by disputed funds. Then he turned toward my sister. His voice was calm, but the silence carried it through the ballroom. "Samantha, why is your estranged sister listed as the guarantor on the loan that paid for our wedding? And why did you hide it from me after she reported that her signature was forged?" The question landed harder than shouting. My sister's face emptied. Her bouquet lowered. A guest near the aisle whispered, "Forged?" My mother reached for the microphone, but Ethan moved it away. My sister said she trusted our mother and believed I would sign later because the money had already been spent. Ethan asked whether that meant she knowingly accepted disputed funds and planned to secure forgiveness after the wedding. She replied that families helped one another. He looked toward me and asked whether she had contacted me before taking the money. She admitted she called only to pressure me into signing. My mother accused Ethan of humiliating his bride. He replied that deception created the humiliation, not the question exposing it. Then he announced that he would not proceed with the marriage. My sister staggered backward as guests reacted in waves, gasps, whispers, phones rising, relatives moving toward the exits. The same people who laughed at my graduation now watched the favored daughter's perfect ceremony collapse beneath facts they could not dismiss as sensitivity. I did not feel triumph. I felt the cold clarity of seeing a structure fail at its weakest point. My mother tried to regain control. She announced that I had manipulated Ethan because I was jealous of my sister's beauty and happiness. 12 years later, she reached for the same weapon. This time, I did not absorb it. I walked forward but did not take the microphone. I told Ethan I had never asked him to cancel the wedding. He confirmed the decision was his. Then I faced the guests and stated 3 facts. I had never authorized the loans. I filed an identity theft report months before receiving the invitation, and my mother attempted to obtain a false retroactive statement from me less than an hour earlier. I held up the unsigned affidavit. My father stepped forward and admitted witnessing signatures prepared without my presence. His confession did not absolve him, but it prevented my mother from claiming I invented everything. One of her business partners immediately left to call an attorney. A supplier demanded to know whether his invoices had also been used in financing applications. The consequences spread because the forgery was not limited to me. My name was simply the thread that pulled the fabric apart. Lender representatives arrived later that afternoon after learning that my mother had tried to obtain a corrective statement while the fraud review remained active. They did not arrest her in the ballroom, and I was grateful. I wanted accountability, not spectacle. They collected the affidavit, requested access to her devices, and instructed the business not to alter records. The hotel froze the event account. Vendors began contacting my sister about unpaid balances. Ethan left with his parents. Before going, he thanked me for answering honestly. I told him truth discovered at the final moment still arrived before a lifetime of deception. My sister sat alone in the bridal suite while her friends removed decorations and packed gifts. She asked me to enter. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Without the audience, she looked less like my mother's perfect success story and more like a frightened woman who had built her identity around being chosen. At first, she blamed me. Then she blamed Ethan, the lender, our father, and finally, our mother. I waited until the blame ran out. "You knew my name was on the loan," I said. "That was when you had a choice." She admitted fearing the wedding would disappear if she questioned the money. I told her I understood fear, but fear did not turn theft into love. She asked whether I was happy. Her question showed she still believed my goal had been to trade places, to become the celebrated sister while she became the shameful one. "No," I answered. "I'm free. Those are not the same thing." By evening, the ballroom was empty except for staff folding chairs. My mother found me near the entrance and said I had achieved what I wanted. The business threatened, my sister abandoned, and the family publicly disgraced. I told her she still refused to name her actions. She forged signatures, lied to lenders, and used a wedding to pressure me into legalizing the deception. I had not destroyed her reputation. I had stopped lending her my silence to protect it. She called me selfish, ugly, and unlovable. The words sounded old and small. "You taught me that family love had to be earned by disappearing," I said. "I spent 12 years learning that real love does not require erasure." Then I walked out carrying the document case she had tried to steal. I did not leave with $355. I left with my identity intact. Eventually cooperated, repaid part of the loss through the sale of the showroom, and had no previous conviction. She received probation, financial monitoring, community service, and a restitution order that consumed most of the assets she had spent decades using to measure success. The business sign came down the following winter. My mother had always believed reputation could be controlled by deciding who stood in the light and who remained in the shadows. She did not lose her standing because I returned. She lost it because documents remembered what people had agreed to forget. My father admitted signing corporate resolutions that supported the fraudulent loans. He avoided criminal charges through cooperation, but lost his position, savings, and the trust of employees who had relied on him. He began sending monthly letters filled with excuses about keeping peace, protecting the company, and believing my mother would eventually correct the accounts. I returned the first three unopened. In the fourth, he finally wrote, "I protected myself from conflict by allowing you to carry it." I answered once and told him forgiveness was not a door he could knock on until I became tired enough to open it. It required him to live differently whether I witnessed the change or not. We now exchange occasional letters, but we do not pretend communication equals reconciliation. My sister spent months fighting vendors and creditors over the canceled wedding. Ethan ended the engagement permanently. She later moved to Dayton, found work at a nonprofit arts center, and began therapy. Nearly 2 years after the wedding, she called without asking for money, a signature, or forgiveness. She apologized for helping erase me and admitted that being the favored daughter had not made her safe. It had only made her useful. Our mother praised her beauty and obedience while those qualities supported the family image, then called her disloyal the moment she cooperated with investigators. I told my sister that an apology showed awareness, not proof of change. Since then, we have built a cautious relationship through small, verifiable actions. She tells the truth, even when it makes her look bad, and I end conversations when she minimizes the past. We meet in public twice a year. There are no dramatic reunions or photographs pretending 12 years disappeared. There is only the slower work of discovering whether trust can grow where entitlement once lived. Marcus and I married in a courthouse with Naomi and 6 friends present. No one ranked the women by appearance or used the ceremony to repair a reputation. When the clerk asked whether I wanted to change my name, I said no. Charlotte Reed had once been the name my mother placed on forged documents because she believed it belonged to her. Keeping it became my declaration that something does not stop being yours because another person misuses it. I later opened a consulting practice that helps banks, charities, and family businesses identify internal fraud before misconduct becomes culture. I also created an emergency grant at the technical college that accepted me when I had almost nothing. The grant gives $355 to students facing sudden housing or transportation crises. It is not a fortune, but I know how far it can carry someone when paired with one honest opportunity. People often ask whether exposing my family was revenge. I understand why. A wedding stopped, a company closed, and my mother lost the authority she had protected for years. But revenge would have required me to create pain for the pleasure of watching them suffer. I did not manufacture their consequences. I documented their actions, refused to sign away the truth, and allowed the people affected by their deception to make informed decisions. Boundaries are not punishments. They are conditions for access to your life. Accountability is not cruelty because the person facing it is related to you. Love without respect becomes control. Loyalty without truth becomes complicity. For years, I believed leaving made me the daughter who broke the family. The investigation taught me that I had only stopped holding its cracks together. My mother's greatest punishment was not losing the showroom. It was losing the power to define reality for everyone around her. My sister's greatest consequence was not the canceled wedding. It was learning that being chosen by a controlling parent can also be captivity. My father's greatest loss was realizing that silence is still a decision when someone else is being harmed. My victory was not proving I had been right. It was walking away without needing their agreement to know who I was. 12 years earlier, my mother said beauty had skipped me. She believed those words would keep me competing for approval. Instead, they pushed me beyond her reach. I left with $355, no secure home, and no guarantee my future would improve. What I gained was more valuable than admiration, education, independence, useful knowledge, healthy relationships, and the ability to recognize manipulation before mistaking it for love. You do not have to destroy the people who mistreated you to reclaim your life. Sometimes the strongest response is to stop lying for them, stop financing their comfort with your dignity, and stop treating access to you as a permanent family right. A relationship that survives only through your silence is not peace. It is captivity with better decorations. So ask yourself this: if protecting your family's image requires you to disappear, whose family are you really protecting? And what could your life become once you finally choose to protect yourself?
Thank you for being here until the end of the story. Everything in this video is fictional and intended only for storytelling, entertainment, and reflection. We hope it reminds you that you can be generous, loyal, and forgiving without allowing others to treat those qualities like weaknesses. The right people will treasure your softness, not use it as an opportunity to hurt you.